Hi, I'm Rashonda Kate. This is Reading with Rashonda. We have been reading Our Nig by Harriet E. Wilson, and we are finishing it today, right now. So let's dive in. Chapter 12, The Winding Up of the Matter. Nothing new under the sun. Solomon. A few years ago, with the compass of my narrative, there appeared often in some of our New England villages professed fugitives from slavery who recounted their personal experience in homely phrase and awakened the indignation of non-slaveholders against Brother Pro. Brother Pro? I don't know what that means. Okay. Oh, Brother pro-slavery. Ah, all right, let me read that again. A few years ago, within the compass of my narrative, there appeared often in some of our New England villages professed fugitives from slavery who recounted their personal experience in homely phrase and awakened the indignation of non-slave holders against Brother Pro. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So there were some people who pretended they were fugitives from slavery, and they retold their personal experience and awakened the indignations of non-slave holders against pro-slavery. Okay. Or is it against pro-freedom? I was not expecting to be in such a tizzy after the first sentence of the last chapter. I feel like they awakened the indignation of non-slave holders against Brother Pro, like pro-freedom. The pro that keeps coming to my mind is prohibition, and I know that's wrong. It's the wrong era, but I feel like there's a word on the tip of my tongue or maybe the edge of my brain that I'm trying to access, and I am struggling. Let's keep reading. With the context, it will become clear. That's why we read like this. You can't always stop when you don't get it. Sometimes you pause and you think about it and you still don't get it. So you keep reading and you see what you learn from the context. Such a one appeared in the new home of Fredo, and as people of color were rare there, it was strange she should attract her dark brother, that he should inquire her out, succeed in seeing her, feel a strange sensation in his heart towards her, that he should toy with her shining curls, feel proud to provoke her to smile and expose the ivory concealed by thin ruby lips, that her sparkling eyes should fascinate, that he should propose, that they should marry. A short acquaintance was indeed an objection, but she saw him often and thought she knew him. That doesn't bode well. He never spoke of his enslavement to her when alone, but she felt that, like her own oppression, it was painful to disturb oftener than was needful. Okay, so we have a new person in Fredo's new house. He pretended like he was a fugitive slave, so already we are questioning his integrity. He made eyes at Fredo, and keep in mind, she's thought she's ugly and horrible her whole life, so this is the first person who's ever, the first possible romantic interest who's ever paid her any attention, and her nose is wide open. All right. He was a fine, straight Negro whose back showed no marks of the lash, erect as if it never crouched beneath a burden. So he used to be a slave, but he stands up straight, bears no scars, and walks like he's never done any work in his life. There was a silent sympathy which Fredo felt attracted her, and she opened her heart to the presence of love, that arbitrary and inexorable tyrant. That is quite a way to describe love, an arbitrary and inexorable tyrant. Yeek. She removed to Singleton, her former residence, and there was married. Here were Fredo's first feelings of trust and repose on human arm. She realized for the first time the relief of looking to another for comfortable support. Occasionally he would leave her to lecture. It's in quotation marks. I'm not just adding the air quotes. Occasionally he would leave her to lecture. Let's assume that he is telling her he's on the lecture tour, talking about his alleged story of escape from slavery and trying to get people to be on his side. Those tours were prolonged, often to weeks. Of course, he had little spare money. Fredo was again feeling her self-dependence and was at last compelled to resort alone to that. Samuel was kind to her when at home, but made no provision for his absence, which was at last unprecedented. So he's gone all the time. He doesn't bring her any money, and he makes no provisions for her when he's going to be gone. I would call him no count. But let's keep reading. He left her to her fate, embarked at sea, with the disclosure that he had never seen the South, and that his illiterate harangues were humbugs for hungry abolitionists. Okay, but we were talking about the pro-freedom side. Woot woot! Once more alone, yet not alone, a still newer companionship would soon force itself upon her. No one wanted her with such prospects. Herself was burden enough. Who would have an additional one? Poor Fredo! The horrors of her condition nearly prostrated her, and she was again thrown upon the public for sustenance. Then followed the birth of her child. The long-absent Samuel unexpectedly returned and rescued her from Charity. Recovering from her expected illness, she once more commenced toil for herself and child in a room obtained of a poor woman, but with better fortune. One so well known would not be wholly neglected. Kind friends watched her when Samuel was from home, prevented her from suffering, and when the cold weather pinched the warmly clad, a kind friend took them in and thus preserved them. At last Samuel's business became very engrossing, and after long desertion, news reached his family that he had become a victim of yellow fever in New Orleans. Samuel, you should have just left them alone. You're just creating more heartache for them. So much toil as was necessary to sustain Fredo was more than she could endure. As soon as her babe could be nourished without his mother, she left him in charge of a Mrs. Capon and procured an agency, hoping to recruit her health and gain an easier livelihood for herself and child. This afforded her better maintenance than she had yet found. She passed into the various towns of the state she lived in, then into Massachusetts. Strange were some of her adventures. Watched by kidnappers, maltreated by professed abolitionists who didn't want slaves at the South nor niggers in their own houses. North. Faugh! To lodge one, to eat with one, to admit one through the front door, to sit next to one. Awful. And that's how they felt in the North. Traps slyly laid by the vicious to ensnare her, she resolutely avoided. In one of her tours, Providence favored her with a friend who, pitying her cheerless lot, kindly provided her with a valuable recipe from which she might herself manufacture a useful article for her maintenance. This proved a more agreeable and an easier way of sustenance. And thus, to the present time, may you see her busily employed in preparing her merchandise, then sallying forth to encounter many frowns, but some kind friends and purchasers. Nothing turns her from her steadfast purpose of elevating herself. Reposing on God, she has thus far journeyed securely. Reposing on God, she has thus far journeyed securely. Still an invalid, she asks your sympathy, gentle reader. Refuse not, because some part of her history is unknown, saved by the omniscient God. Enough has been unrolled to demand your sympathy and aid. Do you ask the destiny of those connected with her early history? Actually, yes, I have been wondering. A few years only have elapsed since Mr. and Mrs. B passed into another world. As age increased, Mrs. B became more irritable, so that no one, even her own children, could remain with her, and she was accompanied by her husband to the home of Lewis, where, after an agony in death unspeakable, she passed away. Only a few months since, Aunt Abby entered heaven. Jack and his wife rest in heaven, disturbed by no intruders. And Susan and her child are yet with the living. Jane has silver locks in place of auburn tresses, but she has the early love of Henry still, and has never regretted her exchange of lovers. Fredo has passed from their memories, as Joseph from the butlers, but she will never cease to track them till beyond mortal vision. And that is Our Nig by Harriet E. Wilson, the first novel published by an African American woman. That's pretty exciting. It reads like it's an actual person, and that was intentional. Fiction and nonfiction can gain support and sympathy and help forward a cause. So in this novel, clearly Wilson is forwarding the cause of indentured servants and slaves. She's tied them together nicely in the book. She's shown cruelties that happen in the North, because sometimes we think cruelties only happened in the South, and I loved it. So that is Our Nig by Harriet E. Wilson. Thanks for joining me. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.